Don't settle for bad socks. Get comfort and grip at an affordable price with Pure Grip Socks Pro. Choose from 18 different colors at puregripsocks.com.
If there's one line of football boots that's been in desperate need of change for a little while now, it's the Adidas Copa Sense series. And inside this box, I have its replacement, a pair of football boots that admittedly changes very little, but those little changes make for a gigantic improvement in the overall fit, feel, and experience. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Adidas Copa Pure.1. Of course, implying that there is going to be a plus model that I can only assume will be laceless, but this is actually a limited edition pre-release teaser colorway where the tech specs aren't out yet, but this is what the actual boot will be, limited to 415 pairs, all in the soft ground layout, and for whatever reason, retailing for 350 euros in Europe, but only $230 in the US. No clue why that's the case. And like I said, this is a pre-release colorway, so we don't have any official tech specs as of yet, but given the limited change and familiar elements that have been incorporated into the Copa Pure.1, I feel like I can give a pretty good overview of what these boots are all about, with of course a more official release of the Pure.1 and I'm sure the Pure Plus coming likely very soon. Nonetheless, if you're interested in learning more about the next generation of modern Copa, including how they fit and feel on feet, please stick around and watch the entire review. And if you are interested in a pair for yourself, despite the low numbers, they have not sold out. So if you are interested in a pair below their normal retail price by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes, make sure you check out that first link down below. Drop a like for the first review of 2023 and make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you haven't already, along with hitting that little bell notification so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2023. So, being the replacement for the Copa Sense.1, there are three areas in particular where I was hoping to see some improvement with this new Pure.1 model, and luckily they seem to have improved all of those areas, with the one wild card being that this is the soft ground layout, where you'll notice this features the Adidas Nemesis 17 torsion frame sole plate, which was actually used as the soft ground option for the Copa Sense and really the last several generations of Copa. Whether or not this torsion frame will carry over into the FG model, which of course will be far more popular, remains to be seen. But as it is, I think this is actually a much better sole plate than the normal FG Copa Sense one, and also it decreases the overall weight of the football boot, which is one of my complaints of that Sense.1. These are significantly lighter, you'll see that in just a second. My second complaint being the comfort and fit, which I think has been addressed with the shape, the material used through the midfoot, as well as the lack of Sense pods in the heel liner. And then my third complaint being the amount of leather included, which is still not overly significant. You can get more leather from other football boots in the same category. However, there is more leather on the Copa Pure.1 than there was on the Sense.1, where I honestly thought the amount of leather on that boot was borderline laughable considering which category it fell into. As for the upper, we of course have no official tech specs, but you will very clearly see the Fusion Skin branding. So the same basic concept and technology that was introduced in the Copa 19 generation remains true here on the Pure.1, as we've seen for the last several models, where it's leather through the forefoot and toe box area, and then it seamlessly transitions into this synthetic material, which this time around, along with the new shape, feels significantly softer and just works better overall. The fit and comfort, I think, is the biggest improvement you're going to find coming from the Copa Sense.1, which I thought just wasn't a very comfortable pair of football boots, which is pretty much unacceptable these days, especially if you're going to be spending $200+. Nonetheless, there is a rumor, and again, unofficial at this point being that there's no tech specs, that this is not actually kangaroo leather like we've seen on the last several generations of modern Copas. What is it? We don't know for sure, but I can tell you that this feels softer than what was featured on the Copa Sense.1 and Sense Plus, and the reasoning for not using kangaroo leather is not necessarily a cost-cutting measure, but it's the California market. Kangaroo leather has been banned in California. That is a large amount of people, a lot of potential boots to sell, and I don't think Adidas or any other brand for that matter is looking to miss out on that market any longer. So Adidas seems to be the first potentially to go in this direction, but If they're doing this, I can only imagine it's a matter of time before other brands follow because, again, a lot of people live in California. As for the leather itself, like I said, super soft, definitely on the thin side. I know there are some people on the internet that love to talk about how protective the modern Copa line is. That is in fact not true. This is actually some of the thinnest leather you're going to find on any football boot, this being a little bit more padded than what was found on the Sense Plus and Sense .1, which just wasn't a protective football boot. The leather was super, super thin. So this is gonna have a little bit more of that plush kind of padded feel that you expect from a leather upper. The finish on the surface of the upper is relatively smooth, so no additional grip on the ball. Very traditional in that regard. And as far as the amount of leather, you can actually see the cutoff point very faintly right around here. So from here forward, wrapping all the way around the front of the lacing system, and then cutting off on this seam right here that you can very faintly see the stitching. The Fusion Skin does a good job of hiding that transition. That front part of the boot is leather. The rest of it is this synthetic material with a little bit of padding through the midfoot, where honestly, it feels quite consistent along the medial side, which I'm very thankful for. I really hate it when a leather football boot has this harsh transition between something really thin and really padded. You don't get that with this. And again, the midfoot material in general, while having a decent amount of structure with the laces tied tight, it still feels very soft and for the most part leather-like, ultimately making for a very comfortable pair of football boots, which I think is what anybody would want from something bearing the Copa name. It's also worth noting that despite all the 3D texturing that you have here on the surface, it does not feel like there is any memory foam anywhere on this upper. So unlike the Sense .1 and Sense Plus, which had that large chunk of memory foam right here on the medial side of the forefoot, that's gone entirely. Same with the one on the lateral side. It just has some sculpted kind of shaping on the surface, and that's about it. As the name would suggest, it's a lot more pure this time around. Being that this is the .1 model, you are going to find laces on the upper, this kind of trending on the traditional side of things with a central lacing system, a traditional U-throat construction. The laces themselves do sit a little bit higher on the foot. They don't run super deep like you might find from some other models, but I didn't find that that affected the quality of the fit or lockdown in any way at all. And honestly, I just really appreciate the traditional opening. It makes putting these on and tying them up significantly easier than so many one-piece football boots that are out there right now. And I really feel like the quality of fit and adjustability is just so much better with this type of construction than a lot of the one-piece uppers that we can typically find. It's just a very well executed design simply because of how simple it is. And then the tongue itself is very different from past Copa models in that it's almost like this neoprene material with a little bit of foam. It's super soft, it's super flexible, and honestly just feels really good. Matches the softness of the rest of the upper. Moving to the rear, you're going to find a traditional low-cut construction with a little bit of an extended back, this really serving no purpose other than being there for the sake of looks. You have an internal plastic heel counter, and then thankfully the Sense Pod system in the heel liner has been ditched entirely. You are going to find a little bit of a sculpted heel kind of padded insert running across the back where it's not super padded down low, but there is definitely something there. It's lined in this soft microfiber, and while I definitely think just kind of lining the entire heel liner in solid foam would have potentially been a little bit better, this sculpted design, which can sometimes be tricky, does feel quite comfortable. The lockdown is good, the comfort is excellent. I really don't have any complaints. Again, I think this is a gigantic improvement over what was admittedly a very gimmicky and unnecessary way of doing things in the Sense Pod system on the previous generation. And then the insole, fully removable. I'll give you guys a quick look at that. It features a really soft microfiber lining on the surface, and it's made from a single layer of this black foam that actually has some nice density to it. As far as Adidas insoles go, this is actually one of the nicer ones. Which brings us to the base, where again, this is released only in a soft ground variation, so we don't have the true story of what the FG model is going to have. This utilizing the torsion frame from the Nemesis 17, making this 6-year-old tooling, which admittedly is a little bit of a cost-cutting measure from Adidas. Not that there's anything wrong with this tooling, but if you're going to be asking top dollar for a pair of new football boots, it would be nice if everything was new. Nonetheless, this makes for a much lighter construction than the previous generation Copa Sense, even when compared to the FG model, which we'll see in just a second. Although I will say They do include some extra plastic studs to go along with the metal ones inside of the box. However, my pair was actually missing the stud tool, so just something to be aware of if you order a pair. Make sure the stud key is in the box, otherwise you should definitely complain. As for the feel and performance of this sole plate, we've all seen it before, so there's really nothing new to talk about here. It's a pretty standard plastic sole plate, and as far as the soft ground layout is concerned, soft ground stud patterns all tend to perform the same. As far as Adidas including these plastic tip studs along with the metal ones, that does not imply that this is an SG stud pattern. It just means that if you do play in soft ground environments, but perhaps the rules of the league that you play in do not allow for metal tip studs, they include these plastic ones, which, as you can see, are just as long as the metal tipped ones that would normally be included. So still only for use on soft ground, but it is cool that they include them as an extra. Which brings us to the weight, where I do want to make a comparison that admittedly isn't perfect, but it is definitely interesting. I have here an outgoing FG Copa Sense 0.1 and its replacement, the Copa Pure.1, but with the soft ground layout and the plastic studs, which are actually a little bit heavier than the metal ones. And in general, soft ground boots tend to weigh at least an ounce more in the same size than an FG pair. So hopefully these will be lighter than these, but is that actually the case? Both in the same size, 9.5 US. We'll start off with the outgoing Copa Sense 0.1 in FG, 9.45 ounces, the equivalent of 268 grams, which is not particularly lightweight and honestly unimpressive for a top-end model in this day and age. Then we'll throw on the soft ground Copa Pure 0.1, and you can see that they weigh in at 8.8 ounces, the equivalent of 249 grams. So nearly 3/4 of an ounce lighter than the Copa Sense 0.1 that it replaces, with a stud pattern that is also heavier with a thicker plastic, which is only good news because that likely means, if they do decide to use Nemesis FG tooling, which I think would be a weird choice, that the Copa Pure 0.1 will be significantly lighter than the Sense 0.1 that it replaces. For a pair of football boots that more or less look the same, more or less use pretty much the same materials, and more or less have the same overall construction, the difference in fit and comfort when compared to the Copa Sense 0.1 that they replace could not be more dramatic. The leather in the forefoot feels softer, there is more of it, especially here on the medial side. The midfoot feels significantly more natural on feet. There's no awkward stiffness, there's no pinching, and I think the overall shape of the boot is significantly improved. It now has a little bit of a wider profile all the way through, and of course that heel liner just feels normal now. It has the perfect amount of depth, the lockdown is great, and in general, these are just very, very comfortable football boots. Easily the most comfortable and best fitting pair, in my opinion, currently on offer from the Adidas brand. If I had to pick a pair to wear right now from the three stripes, it's the Copa Pure 0.1. I like them that much. And if I had to compare it to something like the Nike Tiempo, there's definitely a little bit of a difference in feel in that the leather is very much focused around the forefoot and toe box area, where the Tiempo has leather all the way through the midfoot for the most part. So you could say that this compares maybe a little bit more closely to something like a Mizuno Morelia Neo 3, which is different, but certainly not a bad comparison to be making. From a width perspective, there's plenty of adjustability because of that central lacing system and traditional tongue construction, where I think these are going to be suitable for just about anybody. They just have so much adjustability to them in terms of overall width. And as far as sizing is concerned, I'm wearing these in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So if you are looking to get a pair for yourself, I would strongly recommend going true to size in order to achieve the best possible fit. So in conclusion, as a replacement for the Copa Sense 0.1, I think the Pure 0.1 is a gigantic improvement. The Copa Sense 0.1 is a football boot that was lacking in the fit department, wasn't as comfortable as the competition, had less leather than the alternatives, and weighed significantly more than just about any other top-end football boot. Compared to the Nike Tiempo Legend 9 Elite for the same price, it just made no sense to buy these. And the Pure 0.1, especially at a glance, almost looks like exactly the same football boot. And that's because on paper, it's actually very similar. However, it's the perfect example of taking what is admittedly a really strong concept and making a bunch of little tweaks to ultimately improve the final product in a very significant way. The leather is softer, you get more of it, the overall fit and shape of the football boot is hugely improved, the normal heel liner is significantly more comfortable, they've reduced the weight of the football boot, and again, we don't know a lot about the sole plate and stud pattern, but given that they go for something traditional, likely something along the lines of this FG stud pattern, I think there's going to be a lot to like about the Copa Pure.1. And as an alternative to something like the Nike Tiempo Legend 9 Elite for the same price, there is now a reason to go for the 3 stripes over a swoosh in the leather football boot department. To make a long story short, it's the best modern Copa model with laces that we've seen in a very long time.